What's up, you sweaty nerds and greasy degenerates? Hanya has officially arrived in Honkai's star rail, and that means it's time to take a look at where Hanya ended up on the tier lists. And some of you might be surprised where she ended up, but we're also going to explain why I think she ended up there on the tier lists. So let's take a look. Alright, so here we are on pridewin.gg, and we have the tier list here for Honkai's star rail. I'll put a link to this in the pinned comment and description below. I highly recommend you come check this out for yourself so that you can see not only the tier list itself, but how they, the criteria for how they assemble the characters on the tier list. And a lot of theory crafters and content creators put their minds together to build this tier list, and a lot of the different things on the site, like the swarm disaster, information and different things like that. So again, highly recommend you guys come check this out. It is the most respected tier list amongst the community for a reason. And no, it is not perfect. No, like every situation is different. So in some scenarios, you might be able to outperform what they did to be able to create the tier list, yada, yada. You get the picture. It is not a perfect tier list, but it is a very good tier list. And it, like I said, is the most respected tier list in the community for a reason. And they are constantly updating this tier list. They're constantly updating the criteria they use to pull this information together. One of the biggest things I think that was a really good sign that they're adjusting it in a really good way and they're updating it in a really good way is Ting Yun finally making her way up to S+ tier, where she always belonged. And you see characters like QQ making their way all the way up to S tier. And, you know, they've added new icons, like such as this like little dice icon, which is a little bit of RNG based kind of tech. So you see QQ up here. If she doesn't get good RNG, she might be a little bit lower. You see Farah up here. If you don't get very good RNG, she might be a little bit lower. Like I said, if you get really good RNG, you might even see potentially better potential than what you see on here right now. So I just wanted to point that out, that this is a very good tier list. It's not perfect, but this is a very good tier list and well respected in the community. Now let's stop yapping and let's get to the tier list. Let's get to what we want to see here. Hanya. I'm really excited to see Hanya placing so highly right off of the bat. We see her here at S tier for the buffer row right here, I guess you could say, the buffer column. This is really good to see for her because I was expecting her to be here. I was a little bit worried. Some people changed their minds on her. They thought she might not be as good as we originally thought. Some people may have overhyped her. She's honestly sitting exactly where I thought she would always end up. And it's really good for me to be able to see that because looking into her kit like a few different times, I was, somewhat skeptical myself. But at the end of the day, I figured that she had enough going on to be able to sit really high on the tier list, which she does. She sits here at S tier. And you see that sometimes some characters suffer from what I like to call the honeymoon phase. Like you see Topaz. Topaz has actually dropped. You see this little arrow right here next to her icon. That means that the character lost rating in the last update, and she was sitting much higher. I thought the same thing about Topaz. When I saw her on this tier list, I thought to myself, and I mentioned this in the tier list video I did for her, that it might be the honeymoon phase effect, where people thought that she might be better than she really is. And it turns out as time went on, she has dropped a little bit, which is fine. She still sits really, really high up on the tier list, but she did suffer from the honeymoon effect. And so she's dropped a little bit. We have other examples of how sometimes we think some characters are maybe not even as good as we thought. For example, you see Dan Heng in Bitter Lune dropping. He recently dropped. His character lost rating in the last update, but he might go back up again because with the release of Hanya will elevate the potential of Dan Heng and Bitter Lune teams because of the skill point problem that he has. He's a very skill point hungry character. Hanya literally generates skill points in more ways than one. And so that's going to really elevate the gameplay and potential of a character like Dan Heng and Bitter Lune. So we might see Dan Heng go up. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. But it just goes to show that when Jingliu released, we had Jingliu and Dan Heng both at the top of S+ tier. And a lot of people were still a little skeptical of Jingliu. I always thought she was going to be either top 1 or 2. And believe it or not, people were telling me that I'm stupid. I don't know what I'm talking about. My theory crafting, badge should be taken away from me because Jingliu's no better than Blade. Well, to you naysayers in the comments, take a look at the screen. What do you see? Oh, turns out that as time has gone on, Jingliu is literally the best DPS in the game. Turns out I was right again. You guys noticing a trend with this? You guys noticing a trend? Okay, maybe, realize the error of your ways. Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we also see here we have Jingyuan dropping a little bit. I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing for Jingyuan. I think this is just the tier list sort of settling a little bit. He's still a very good character. Don't get it twisted, okay? This isn't mid-Yuan time, all right? This is just the tier list evening itself out. We see Yukong here dropping a little bit. I expected this to happen because Hanya is essentially going to replace Yukong on a lot of teams. Not just on the Dan Heng and Bibiter Lune teams. She's going to literally replace Yukong on a lot of teams. There's only so many buffers in the game. And all buffers are so desirable that there's not even a bad buffer in the game. Take a look at this. Is the amplifier, which is basically buffer. If you scroll down, there is no other ones here. These are the buffers, and they're all rated very highly. This means that Yukong is essentially the worst buffer in the game. That doesn't mean she's bad, but when you have other characters that can come up and do even better than them, outperform them in just about every way, you are going to see a character like Yukong drop. That's just the way that it goes. Even on the Dan Heng and Bibiter Lune team, which is where she was, performing the best because she can buff Dan Heng really well, you have a character like Hanya that unfortunately buffs him even better. So you see a character like Yukong drop. This just goes to show that this tier list is really good and that people need to stop being such heavy naysayers of this tier list. We know, we get it. It's not perfect. It's constantly adjusting, but there's a reason why most players use this as a reference point to kind of gauge where certain characters might sit in the meta. And it is constantly changing. And as time has gone on, all these characters, by the way, and it should be noted, I don't want people to get this, mistaken. Hanya sits on S tier above Yukong at E6. Okay, don't forget about that, okay? She sits this high because they're gauging her power level at E6. If you don't have Hanya at E6, you may not have Hanya, you may not have as powerful a Hanya as you might think. The real power spike for Hanya comes from her E4, and then her E6 is also very good, but let's take a look at her E4 real quick. Hanya's E4 is a really big power spike. Hanya's E4, the ultimate duration, is additionally extended for 1 turn. I'm about to get my Hanya at E4, so I get that power spikes. I haven't done it quite yet. We'll get there, don't you worry. But let's take a look at what Hanya's ultimate does, just so that we understand it properly. It increases the speed of a target ally by a certain percentage of Hanya's speed and increases the same target ally's attack by 54%, lasting for 2 turns. Now, these numbers are going to change. My numbers are a little bit low because I haven't fully leveled her up yet. Both of mine stats there for those abilities is at level 8. So those will go up higher. And especially if you have her at E6, they'll go up even higher than that because you'll get 2 more tiers that you can add on top of it. So you can essentially assume that if I had her E6, I would be able to upgrade this ability 4 more times, which is pretty darn valuable. So I just figured that I would point that out. And I want to point out another thing too. What this means is if Hanya can give 1 extra turn to this buff, that means that Hanya's ultimate would last for 3 turns, okay? This might actually be able to create a 100% uptime on Hanya's ultimate. Just like we can get a 100% uptime on Asta's ultimate using, it's a 2-turn ult, but because the cost of her ultimate is so low. What is her ultimate cost? It's like 90, it's 120, but because we can build these characters a certain way. Like you see that I have energy regen on my my planar ornaments. You see I have energy regen rope right here. You see that I have a light cone that gives me energy regen. We're able to create a 100% uptime on Asta's ultimate, and I believe that we're going to be able to create a 100% uptime on Hanya's ultimate as well, despite her ultimate being slightly more expensive than Asta's. It lasts a whole entire another turn. So I believe this is what's making Hanya so valuable. I believe that this is what's making Hanya worthy of her placement on the tier list over here at, you know, S tier. I think that that is where her big power spike comes from. I think that's what's making her so darn good. Just because I know some of you guys are probably curious about it. Her E6 increases the damage boost effect of the talent by an additional 10%. What that means is that's going to give her, let's take a look at her trace, talent. So she'll be able to get even more out of her talent than before with her E6 as well. 10% is no joke, and it stacks on top of everything else that you're already doing with her. So in my opinion, Hanya is one of the new, really desirable Harmony characters. There's a saying out there that your supports, there's a saying out there that your DPS is no better than your supports, right? So if you build up good supports behind your DPS will be able to pop off. So let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think Hanya is sitting at the right spot? Do you think she'll end up dropping by the next update? Let me know what you guys think. Will she end up going up after the next update? Do you think she's as good as Ting Yun? I personally don't think she's quite as good as Ting Yun, but I think she's very valuable. I think that she does sit in a good spot. I think that Asta is like kind of like, these two are really good supports, Asta and Hanya. I think that Hanya will see value in like Dan Hung teams and other certain specific teams. I think Asta will see better use in something like a DOT team. They will have their place in the meta. So let me know what you think about Hanya. And if you found this video helpful or informative in any way, shape, or form, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Peace out.